As we form an evil league.
You know, at that last line, I can only really think of one thing. Fans of Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, this is for you.
Bad horse, bad horse, bad horse, he's bad. The evil league of evil is watching, so beware. The grade that you receive will be your last, we swear. So make the bad horse gleeful, or he'll make you his mare. You're saddled up, there's no recourse. It's Hi-Yo Silver, sign bad horse.
What?
Greetings, Internet, and welcome to Hearthstone Theory. After weeks of patiently staring at my computer screen, watching teaser after teaser after teaser, it finally happened. The announcement for the new Hearthstone expansion, Rise of Shadows. While the plot of the expansion is exciting new territory for the game, today we'll not pay any attention to that.
What?
And instead concentrate on the cards and mechanics of the set. How will those affect the game? Well, we only have a handful of new cards and mechanics to examine thus far, so let's see what we can discover. Penniless, you stole that joke from Raunchy Animation. I know, shut up. Now, I bring dire news. It turns out the League of Evil has discovered where I live, and the only thing that will prevent them from annihilating me is likes and subscribes. So please, like and subscribe. I want to live. On a slightly more serious note, I'm now actually trying to make this channel my living, so liking and subscribing will actually help me live. Therefore, this statement isn't actually hyperbole. Ain't that a thing? Anyways, let's begin. The announcement for this expansion took its time to come out, with the aforementioned week of teasers instead of an actual reveal video. This doesn't really mean anything other than me being annoyed, but I digress. The story follows Rafam and his new League of Evil gathering together to take over the city of Dalaran. This, again, has very little to do with the actual cards of the set, sad to say. However, a few basic deductions can be made about some of the upcoming cards we will encounter, thanks to examples we have already been shown and statements made by Blizzard. Starting with the simple stuff, there won't be a hero card in this expansion.
What?
Shut up, Boom. Yes, sad to say, it's been confirmed that since the spotlight is being shared by 5 different villains, Blizzard wanted to ensure none of them got special treatment. I mean, except for the fact that 2 of them already have hero cards and the third is a portrait in the package deal, and you know what? Screw that logic, Blizzard! Togwaggle should have been a hero card! Shame! Anyways, each of the villains in the league will have a new legendary card printed for them, each of which will almost certainly be a class card. We already have Rafam for Warlock, Lazul for Priest, and Hagatha for Shaman, while it's almost certain that Togwaggle will be for Rogue and Dr. Boom will be for Warrior. Putting the bigger cards aside, we have 4 mechanics coming out of this expansion: Lackeys, Schemes, the new Twin Spell keyword, and Callback cards. Let's break down each of those, starting with the Lackeys. Lackeys are small tokens that certain other cards can generate at random. The flavor for these little guys is actually quite interesting, with each being a pathetic disposable 1/1 that does something relatively strong. Let's look at each example, starting with Kobold Lackey. This card is obviously stronger than a card like Arcane Shot or Holy Smite, but not by much. A similar situation can be found with the Faceless Lackey, since the average 2-drop is worth about 2/2 in stats, making this stronger than most 1-drops. The Ethereal Lackey is similarly balanced, with a Discover usually being valued as a 1-mana card, and this getting 1/1 stats on top of that. Then there's the Witch and the Goblin, slightly more complex cards, but using these pieces in a random deck isn't completely infeasible. One simply requires control of the board, and the other can supply help if the player falls behind on the board. All of these are well and good, but they do have the weakness that you're given them at random. This makes them very similar to spare parts from way back in the day. The difference is that Lackeys are considerably more powerful than spare parts. This means that the odds of them swinging the game with a sudden burst of randomness is considerably more likely. Overall, the mechanic is exactly what it needs to be: a strong semi-random effect, which is Hearthstone at its best. It's also worth noting briefly that in the next couple of expansions, more Lackeys will be added as the League of Evil grows. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Anyways, we have 2 cards that generate Lackeys so far: Evil Miscreant and Improve Morale. Quick card reviews for each of these. The Miscreant gives its user below average board presence and almost no tempo, plus value in the form of Lackeys on the condition that cheap cards are played. Hey Penniless, what's with these symbols that you're using? It's a new system I'm working out the kinks of, just roll with it. So complexity is average while power is high, meaning this card is strong in the right deck. However, the concept of Rogue activating combos is an easy one to fathom, since it's part of their class identity. Therefore, the odds of this showing up in the meta are high. Improve Morale is a similar story in regards to value. However, it instead provides anti-board in a small amount. Not exactly the most handy, so the card gets an almost alright sometimes, and the meta potential of probably not. Even if Warrior gets synergy for this card, they have better options. Can't be too surprised, every expansion needs some weaker cards to keep things diverse. With Lackeys thoroughly covered, let's move on to schemes. Like the bad guys they're based around, these schemes will go specifically to the evil classes, one per. Each turn they're in the player's hand they improve, never stopping in most cases. We can look at this with the decision tree. Each turn the card is in your hand, you can choose to either play it now or save to play in the future when it'll have more power. This means that the cards are strongest in a deck that incentivizes saving the card. To do that, the player should have other cards to play. And to do that, the player needs lots of card draw. Ergo, schemes require card draw to work well. If you're having difficulty grasping this, here's another way to look at it. Schemes make for terrible top decks, and the way you prevent a reliance on top decking is to have adequate card draw. That hopefully reinforces this point. Card draw and schemes are good friends, therefore making the cards usable for slower control and combo decks. With that detail noted, let's move on to rating the 3 schemes we have so far: Hagathas, Togwaggles, and Rafams. Hagatha's scheme is anti-board that requires few friendly minions and the aforementioned card draw. Now, I'll note that this diagram I have up is the simplified version. I want to spare you all from having to look at complex pseudo-mathematics that at its core doesn't make any sense, so simplicity beats accuracy. Anyways, while the scheme's behind the scenes mechanics complicate stuff, on the surface the card is simply strong in the right deck, that right deck being a control combo shaman. Now, unfortunately I can't say for certain if this card will see play. It depends what other control pieces Shaman gets. So that's a maybe for meta potential. Next, Togwaggle's scheme again requires card draw, and puts cards in the deck. Putting cards in the deck is an interesting mechanic, because in the short term it doesn't do anything. But certain decks can build their entire strategy off of this. So this scheme gets a decent if decent, since High Reserve is naturally complex. Whether it sees play, hell if I know. That depends on way too many variables for me to be able to say yet. Or ever. Third up, Lazul's scheme utilizes a rare mechanic for Priest, Anti-Tempo. Anti-Tempo is quite rare and normally quite weak, but Priest has lots of effects that synergize with it, so this card is at least in the right class. However, the card also lacks flexibility. There are lots of circumstances where it can end up completely useless in hand. But then again, it becomes stronger and stronger over time in that case. It's hard, but I'll say the card itself gets an almost alright, but given the class it's in, I'll bump up the meta potential to a maybe. Finally, there's Rafam's scheme, and god damn it, Blizzard! Rafam is supposed to be a badass! Why is his scheme so bad? Seriously, this is a tempo board card that you can't play on curve. That makes it as useless as Bolvar. Old school Bolvar, not the newer, cooler Bolvar. I'm not even gonna give this the decency of an almost alright. Sadly lacking, won't see play, let's move on to our next mechanic. Twin Spell is a new keyword for the set, thematically representing the magical might of Dalaran defending itself from the League. Quite simply, the act of casting the spell puts another copy of the spell in your hand. This once again translates to value, giving the players another card quite similarly to Firefly. The notable thing about this mechanic is that you want the card in question to be as cheap as possible. That both ups the ease of being able to use both parts of the spell, while also synergizing with the value generation. If you have lots of cards, you want some of them to be cheap so that they can be played easily. All in all, pretty straightforward. So let's look at our example. Okay, Blizzard, very funny, but I said that the Twin Spell cards are supposed to be cheap. Now show us the real card. Really? You can't... Come on, Blizzard! You had one job! Alright, to be fair, there had to be some expensive Twin Spell cards to fill design space, and there is the potential for synergies with these high-cost spells. But in this case, all we have is a slow-as-a-snail tempo board card. Even accounting for Druid's potential synergies, it just doesn't add up. Fun for the arena, won't see play. And now we have our final feature of the set, Callback cards. It appears each League member is bringing back an old idea from previous sets, one card each. Since they're so few in number, I'll review each of those as they come out, starting with the 2 we currently have. Forbidden Words is... weak. Then again, all but one of the forbidden cards were weak. The strength came with their versatility. In this card's case, it isn't worth using against the strongest opposing minions. That means it's basically a more complicated Shadowward Pain with a panic, spend all your mana to kill a big guy button. That does make it slightly more flexible. That plus it being able to kill 4 attack minions. Yeah, I'd say this has a chance to work. Just make sure to pack some copies of Shadowward Death in the deck you use it in. Omega Devastator, which by the way totally stole its art from somewhere else, exemplifies what Omega cards tried to do but mostly failed to do. It's a tempo board card that in the late game gives an extra boost. It's certainly pretty good in Arena, but what about Constructed? Well, given that it's a mech, Omega Assembly is the other good Omega card, and the Dr. Boom Hero card likely works in a board control deck, this card may actually see play. Dr. Boom will be one of the last hero cards available in Standard after all. It might just complete a mech control deck. And that's about it for new mechanics. So it's time to go over all the other cards we have so far. Ready, set, go! Spellword Jeweler. You know, my hypothesis with this card and cards like Drakari Trickster is that they're made just to have Arena become more interesting. Perfectly Balanced plus a bonus effect isn't good enough for Constructed, unless this perfectly counters another strategy. Which, who knows, it might. Chef Nomi. You run out of cards and this guy is Dragon Caller Alana. Running out of cards is very difficult, so stupid unless it isn't, probably not seeing play. Oblivitron! A Death Rattle mech that synergizes with Death Rattle mechs and is pathetic otherwise? Just given the nature of certain Hunter cards, I actually have to give this a maybe for seeing play, but I don't hesitate to call it stupid unless it isn't. Caligos. My god, that's an expensive dragon. Unfortunately, you need to keep this on the board for it to keep working, but if you can pull that off, it might not be stupid. And again, as much as I hate to keep saying maybe, I sincerely don't have enough info about where Mage will be once the rotation happens. So, maybe for the meta. Swamp Queen Hagatha. Compare and contrast with Ancient of Lore, a relatively weak card, but remember that the horror is going to be stronger than whatever comes from the top of your deck. The teaching works like discovering the spells, kinda like how Kazakis worked but more expensive. Also worth noting, Overload affects you normally. In the end, the value of this card pushes it up to pretty good. I hope it sees play because it's actually incredibly cool, but I can only give it a maybe in that regard. Archvillain Rafam. Strong stat line, ups the average power of your deck, pretty good. As for seeing play, it's very hard for me to say with certainty, as with most of these cards. If you have a problem with that, well, cut me some slack already. And finally, Madame Lazul. Well, would you look at that, a card that provides significant value and has half-decent tempo. Just compare it to Stitch Tracker. But then there's the icing on the cake. The fact that when this card is played, its user immediately unveils 3 cards from the opponent's hand. That's awesome! This is pretty much what Chameleos wished that it was. The base stats are good enough for a pretty good, but the knowledge application bumps this up to a crafted golden. This is what a good legendary looks like. And that's all we have for the time being. Now time for the final question of the day. Given the mechanics and cards we have been presented, what do I think of this expansion? What will happen with Hearthstone when this is released? The thing about this circumstance is that it's incredibly hard to determine what's going to happen next. As I've covered in previous episodes, the Year of the Mammoth had the strongest expansions, well, ever, and those expansions are the ones we'll be losing. That means that the average power of cards in Standard will go down, which may or may not boost the relevance of these latest 3 sets. Who knows, we may actually see a mech deck work despite them not working at all before. Rise of Shadows, meanwhile, is going to be the weakest set of the 3 we get this year, since the earliest sets have to be weaker than the later ones. That's not hugely relevant. Ungoro was the weakest set of the Year of the Mammoth and was still plenty successful. What it does mean is that this expansion is going to set the precedent for the rest of this year. Will it be stronger, weaker, or about the same as the Year of the Ravens expansions? I don't know, and won't know until the expansion actually comes out. We can only hope until then. In the meantime, be sure to come back here as cards are released to get my take on them. My schedule has recently lightened up, which means more time for YouTube. So until next time, smile on to just. Or take the path of the villains, whichever suits your fancy.